Please be seated. This is going to be a little odd for me because I haven't preached behind a pulpit in many years now. But in spirit of the tradition, I will do that, even though I may feel that my hands are tied, but I'll get over that, I'm sure. So for such a time as this, I'd like to share first an idea, and maybe a suggestion for fathers of daughters or parents of daughters that are about to begin their dating age. There was a gentleman, a family, that drew an idea of an application for permission to date my daughter. After asking the standard information like name, date of birth, IQ, GPA, Boy Scout rank, the applicant was then asked, "Do you own a van? Yes or no? Do you own a truck with oversized tires? Yes or no? Do you own a waterbed? Yes or no? Do you have an earring, a nose ring, a belly button ring, or a tattoo? Yes or no? Do you own a pickup with a mattress in the back? Yes or no?" The application then notes, if yes to any of the above, discontinue the application and leave the premises immediately. But then there was an additional part for the applicants that were still sticking around, and it was an essay, several essays here, in 50 words or less. What does late mean to you? The second one, in 50 words or less, what does "don't touch my daughter" mean to you? And in 25 words or less, what does abstinence mean to you? After completing the application, the applicant affirms that the information provided is true under penalty of death, dismemberment, and torture. And the fine print at the bottom of the application notes that the applicant should allow 4 to 6 years for processing. And any rejected applicants will be notified by 2 gentlemen wearing white ties and carrying violin cases. I didn't have daughters. I had sons. But I do have a granddaughter. I have a wife. I have nieces. And so, in light of this applicant, I truly can relate. Not only to that, but to the conversations that have been going around the media and all the social networks, and conversations around tables and restaurants and workplaces this week about the Supreme Judge questioning. I didn't get to see Dr. Ford's testimony. I was working. But I was able to get home early enough on Friday to see a good portion of Judge Kavanaugh's response. And from the clips of what I saw of Dr. Ford and of the comments that I heard being expressed, I realized that both were very credible witnesses, giving testimony to the realities that they adhered to. And that Dr. Ford, I don't think there's a doubt in anyone's mind that she was abused as a young teenager. The doubt is just who did it. Now, I know that witnesses can get things wrong. There was a point in my life where I was driving down the street and made a left-hand turn onto a side street and noticed that there was a car in front of me that had suddenly thrown his reverse lights on and was backing up. And I immediately put on the brakes and stopped, and he backed right into my front end of my car. At that point, we both got out of our cars to assess the damage, and he said that I ran into him, and I said, well, you were backing up and ran into me. And there were two witnesses on the corner that came running up and said, we saw the whole thing, and you ran into him. And I was just kind of open-mouthed there, saying, really? Really? So even the testimony of witnesses can be askewed. But I think for such a time as we have today, on particularly on the social network, on Facebook, of which I subscribe, and fortunately it doesn't look like I was one of those that was hacked. Many of the comments was, this happened 30 years ago. Why even bother with it? And I can understand that perspective because many years have gone by, many things have changed. But as I thought about it, I thought 30 years ago, what I did, what anybody did, really does matter. Particularly in the issue of sexual abuse, because if we say that the sexual abuse that happened to Dr. Ford doesn't matter because it was 30 years ago, we are completely discounting the life that she is living. And we also are sending a message to our young people that what they do now and get away with has no results in the future, and they can do whatever they think they can get away with. That isn't the message I would want to send to my children or grandchildren. I know 2 women in my life that have been sexually abused as teenagers. And what they have told me is that experience had diminished who they were, their self-esteem, to the point where it was years and decades before they even came to grips of what it was and what it meant to them and their lives. So there's no shadow of doubt in my mind that Dr. Ford was perfectly normal in not coming forward until 30 years later. But what is unfortunate is if these claims are false on Judge Kavanaugh, then it is a terrible thing to put that man and his family through. But even in the railings of the Republican Party, as the Republicans and Democrats go head-to-head with one another, their view is that, this is all a conspiracy, that it was all brought about in trying to discredit the Republican nominee to the Supreme Court. And yet not one of them will say that Dr. Ford lied. They say she was a very credible witness. So where is the deceit? I think that we as a people just need to realize that as Democrats and Republicans, as United Church of Christ people and Baptists and Lutherans and us as Americans and the world around us, we have to realize that we are all people. Now the story of Esther is a story that really was diminished in today's reading because there was much more background that went into it. That Queen Vashti was ordered to parade before her husband's party, which was all men, to wear her crown, and it's implied that she was to parade herself with only the crown, and that was all that she was to wear, and she refused and was put to death because she refused to follow the instructions of her king, her Lord and Master. And Esther is a woman that entered into what we would consider a beauty contest. And how beauty contests have changed over the past couple years. But she was proclaimed the winner. She hid her Jewishness from the king and his court. But her cousin Mordecai said, "For such a time as this, you have been appointed to this position, and we shall see what is called out for you to do." And Haman's deceit is to kill Mordecai and all his people, all the Jewish people. And so we have one of the early accounts of a Holocaust for a group of people of a different faith. And encourage, realizing that Esther's predecessor was killed for disobeying the king. She steps forward and says, "Sir, I want you to listen to me." And you didn't do that to the king. You waited for the king to acknowledge you before you said or did anything in the king's presence. But she had the gumption to step forward and say, "I have a request and I wish for you to listen. Let's have a party. And we will unpack that request." For such a time as this, Esther stepped forward and saved her people. For such a time as this, Dr. Ford and the Me Too movement has stepped forward and said, we as a society need to change how we do our living from day to day and how we need to treat one another. Rather than objectification of women in particular, but sometimes men, but mostly women, we need to rather honor and respect one another. I don't think Jesus' message would be any different than that. In fact, Jesus says, "Do not lose your saltiness, for salt has lost its flavor. It's valueless." So those people that have lost their sense of propriety, of right and wrong, have gone far beyond losing their saltiness. And we should be careful when we begin to blame the victim. But in this case, we have two victims, Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. Hopefully we'll get to the bottom of things in the weeks to come, but I'm not so sure. My faith is not that strong in the workings of men and women in that vein. But I do know that we as a people need to stop our bickering one against the other and begin to listen and respect. For that is what God calls us to do, and what God calls us to be, a people honoring one another. Amen.